Some empires in history collapse in a single battle. Some disappear through invasion. But Urartu, it was not defeated in a great pitched battle, nor was its capital burned by enemy armies. Yet one day, it simply vanished. The walls were still standing. The fortresses were still intact. But the kingdom was gone. Urartu was a kingdom that managed to survive in one of the harshest geographies in history. To its south stood Assyria. To its east, the Medes. Urartu was a kingdom squeezed between two giant powers. History books usually prefer clear endings: a great battle, a looted capital, burning palaces. But this is the story of a kingdom slowly exhausting itself while trying to survive in one of the harshest landscapes on Earth. On one side stood the ruthless war machine of Assyria. On the other, the rapidly rising Medes. Caught between these two powers, the kingdom could barely breathe. And yet Urartu managed to survive for centuries. But no kingdom can remain stretched like a bow forever. How long can a kingdom endure when it is compressed between two empires like a drawn bowstring? Urartu's answer lies within one of the quietest collapses in history. In Tušpa, the heart of the kingdom, life began with the psychology of a siege. These lands survived not only through courage, but through mathematics and iron. The people of Urartu learned to shape nature not as an enemy, but as a fortress wall. By building thousands of kilometers of canals, they turned barren mountains into vineyards. They carved massive rock formations into fortresses. But all of this engineering genius had a single purpose: resistance. Urartu's strength did not come only from its army. This kingdom was an engineering state. From watchtowers built on the peaks of mountains, they monitored every movement across the region. The central authority ruled with an iron fist. Even its most distant fortress was governed with the same discipline. But this flawless system had a heavy cost. Every fortress, every canal, and every soldier meant enormous consumption of resources. Could such a strategic geography ever truly be secure? Urartu's magnificence was also the sign of the disaster that would eventually fall upon it. The collapse first began as a whisper along the borders. To the south stood one of the most ruthless war machines history had ever seen: the Assyrian Empire. The Assyrians had their eyes on Urartu's iron mines and horse herds. In the annals of their kings, Urartu was described as a rival that needed to be brought to its knees. Every spring, the footsteps of Assyrian armies echoed across the hot plains of Mesopotamia. Meanwhile, the king of Urartu studied his maps like a chess master, calculating the next move. But the pressure was not limited to the south. From the north came the raids of the Cimmerians and the Scythians. In the east, the Medes were growing stronger by the day. The kingdom was being trapped in a vice. Trade routes slowly began to shift. The passes that Urartu once controlled now brought more blood and expense than prosperity. They lived in constant readiness. This state slowly spread through the kingdom like a cancer, eroding its social fabric. The hands that once shaped iron into art could barely hold a plow anymore. The canals were no longer maintained. The system slowly began to creak under its own weight. Urartu was no longer behaving like a state, but like a tired organism. Then, one of the strangest things in history happened. Despite all these fortresses, all these armies, all this engineering, it was as if the kingdom was slowly erased by an invisible hand. And this is where Urartu's greatest mystery begins. When archaeologists investigated the end of Urartu, they encountered something surprising. There are no traces of a massive battle. There is no great layer of fire covering its cities. No mass graves filled with thousands of bodies piled upon one another. You will not find an account of the capital being besieged and destroyed. It is as if the kingdom was not extinguished in a single night, but slowly dimmed. Perhaps Urartu never truly lost a single great war. Perhaps they were never destroyed by the swords of their enemies. Perhaps they were crushed under the unsustainability of the massive system they themselves had built. Imagine a civilization that resisted the most powerful armies of the world for centuries. Yet in the end, it simply withdrew from history because it was exhausted. This was not a sudden collapse, it was a slow dissolution. Just as stone erodes under the wind, Urartu could not endure the endless erosion of geopolitics. But Urartu's tragedy was something else entirely. It lost to geopolitics. Its geography offered an incredible shield of protection, but that same geography also isolated it from the rest of the world. To avoid being crushed between two great powers, it expended enormous energy, and eventually, it consumed itself. Civilizations can also fall victim to long-term pressure, to chronic stress. They collapse when institutions slowly lose their function. What we see in the case of Urartu is the collapse of a societal immune system. The enemy may stand outside, yes, but the true destruction happens when the internal energy runs out. Like a great plane tree, it may still appear magnificent and unshakable from the outside, but a hollow trunk is doomed to fall in the first strong wind. When that wind finally came, the mountain fortresses of Urartu collapsed, because there was no longer that sacred purpose, that collective will, holding them together. People no longer believed the fortresses were worth dying for. They simply wanted to survive. No one directly conquered Urartu. No one completely breached its walls. But when that critical threshold was crossed, no one lifted a finger to save it either. All that remained were empty fortresses and dried canals. The people who once defended those fortresses were gone, because the thing that destroys a civilization is not always enemy armies. Sometimes, it is simply a will that has run out. The end of Urartu was not a war. It was not an invasion. This was the slow exhaustion of a civilization. Because some empires are never conquered, they simply fade away.